Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we are going to do a deep dive, going to really get into the nitty-gritty of child trafficking.
Yeah.
Just such a complex issue.
Oh, yeah, so many layers.
And I mean, we've got a ton of sources here. We've got Wikipedia articles, YouTube videos from channels like Unfiltered Stories, Sean Ryan clips, and we've got some reports, academic papers, and even some organizational websites.
It's gonna be a deep dive for sure.
So we're going to unpack all of that and hopefully equip you guys with a deeper understanding of this global issue.
Yeah, I think one thing that all of these sources really highlight is how vulnerable children are in different situations and just how easily they can be exploited.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually reading that Wikipedia article on child sex tourism, and one of the things that they talk about is poverty and conflict, how it kind of creates this perfect storm for traffickers, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when families are struggling to survive, it makes children tragically easy targets for exploitation.
And the Wikipedia article, it goes on to list some of the global hotspots where this kind of exploitation is so rampant.
Like where?
Well, we're talking about places like South Africa, Thailand, Cambodia, and even the United States.
Well, it's happening everywhere.
And that's what's crazy, right?
Mm.
It's not just an over-there problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so often we think about it as something that's happening in faraway places.
Yeah.
But, I was looking at the 2023 Global Slavery Index,
Hmm.
and it estimates that over 1 million people are living in modern slavery right here in the U.S.
It's mind-blowing, and these sources are very clear that human trafficking isn't just limited to sex trafficking.
Yeah.
It also includes forced labor and domestic servitude, which are often hidden right in plain sight.
It really, it's so hidden, and that's something that's so striking about this, that I was reading that Wikipedia article, and they were talking about the most frequent age range for child victims in Cambodia and Thailand.
Yeah.
It's 6 to 11 years old.
Oh my gosh.
6 to 11.
Why do you think that age range is so prominent?
Well, I don't know. It's so chilling to think about it, but it kind of makes me think about the tactics of these traffickers,
Oh, yeah.
right? They're preying on these children who are old enough to maybe follow instructions,
Right.
but young enough to be easily manipulated and controlled.
Right. They're still really impressionable
So impressionable.
at that age.
And that makes me think about the psychological manipulation involved.
Totally.
And there was this one story from the Unfiltered Stories YouTube channel.
Oh, yeah, I saw that one.
Oh my gosh.
The woman who was adopted by a predator?
That's the one. It was just so striking because it wasn't a stranger abduction.
Yeah.
This was her adoptive mother, like someone that she should have been able to trust.
It's really insidious how trafficking can exploit existing vulnerabilities like that.
Yeah.
Infiltrating families and communities
And it's happening in plain sight.
makes it so much harder to detect and combat.
So difficult. And I think that same YouTube channel, Unfiltered Stories, they share another story of this woman who was abused by her stepfather.
Oh, wow.
And her story, it really highlighted the long-lasting trauma,
Yeah.
that trafficking just inflicts both physically and emotionally.
The scars run deep.
And we really see that come out in these personal stories.
Oh, for sure.
These aren't just isolated incidents.
Right.
These are lives that have been, forever altered.
Yeah, the impact is just devastating.
So let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
Let's talk about the online world.
Oh, yeah, the dark side of the web.
Because as you can imagine, it plays a really significant role in child exploitation these days.
Absolutely. It's a whole new frontier for these predators.
And it's scary. And, I was watching this Sean Ryan clips video
Yeah.
about Nathan Larson.
Oh, yeah, the politician.
Yeah, who ran for Congress running this website for pedophiles.
I mean, how disturbing is that?
And he had this quote that was just chilling.
What did he say?
He said, "It's not enough to abuse children. You need to reproduce the next generation with them."
Ugh, that is just sickening. It sends chills down my spine.
And it's such a terrifying glimpse into the mind of a predator. And it reveals just how organized these networks can be.
I mean, they use code words and phrases to communicate and evade detection.
Like cheese pizza.
Oh my God, cheese pizza? That's awful.
I know, it just shows you that this isn't some obscure corner of the internet.
Yeah.
This is happening on platforms that we're all using every single day.
It's terrifying how easily accessible it is.
And the anonymity that the internet provides, it really just makes it so much easier for predators to connect and to share information, which amplifies this threat.
Absolutely. It's a whole network of exploitation operating under the radar.
It really is. And it's not just about individual predators.
Right.
There are sophisticated, organized networks operating on the dark web.
It's like a hidden world with its own rules and structures.
And I was watching another story on Unfiltered Stories, and it described this woman who was forced into an elite pedophile ring in Belgium.
Belgium. Wow.
And her instructions were, never speak about it and marry into a wealthy family.
Oh my God.
Like, the level of manipulation and control is astounding.
It really highlights how these networks thrive on secrecy and silence.
Yeah, it's like something out of a nightmare, honestly.
It is.
But thankfully, there are people actively fighting back against this darkness,
Well,
you know?
that's a relief to hear.
I mean, we've got so many sources introducing individuals and organizations
Right.
who are dedicating their lives to combating child trafficking.
That's amazing.
And they're all approaching this from so many different angles.
I'd love to hear more about the work they're doing.
Yeah, let's dive into that.
Okay.
So we have Shared Hope International.
Okay.
And what's really interesting about them is that they are dedicated to preventing child sex trafficking.
So it's not just about reacting after the fact.
Not just reacting.
They're trying to stop it before it even happens.
Exactly.
That's incredible.
And they rely solely on private donors.
Wow. That speaks volumes about the trust and support they've built
It really does.
within their community.
And one thing I thought was really fascinating is that they use Salesforce.
Salesforce. What for?
Yeah, it's a really innovative use of technology.
Oh, wow.
And they're using it to better understand and engage their supporters, which ultimately leads to more lives being saved.
That's amazing, using technology for good.
Exactly. And then there's this guy, Caleb Altmaier.
Okay.
He's featured in this Michael Franzese YouTube video.
Okay.
And he's all about rescuing trafficked women.
Wow. That takes a lot of courage.
It really does. And his work really emphasizes this crucial distinction between human smuggling and human trafficking.
Oh, that's important. People often confuse those two.
Yeah, they do.
So what's the difference?
So he makes this point that only about 3% of cases actually involve kidnapping.
Really? I thought it was much higher.
I know, right? I did too. You always imagine someone getting snatched off the street.
That's the image we usually have in mind.
Yeah, but that's not the reality for most victims.
So what is it then?
Well, he really focuses on this concept of force, fraud, or coercion.
So can you give some examples?
Yeah, like forcing someone to work in a strip club against their will,
Oh, gosh.
or threatening to harm their children if they don't comply.
That's horrible. It's all about power and control.
Exactly, and those tactics are way more common than just outright abduction.
That makes sense.
And he also highlighted this fact that surprised me,
What's that?
that 75% of sex trafficking victims are actually women over 18.
Wow, so it's not just a problem for children.
It's not. It's a reminder that this issue extends far beyond just children. It affects people of all ages.
You're right. We need to remember that.
Let's talk about Ryan Montgomery now. You familiar with him?
Ryan Montgomery.
Yeah, he's this ethical hacker.
Oh, I think I've heard of him.
He was on the Sean Ryan show.
Right. The guy who exposes vulnerabilities on websites.
Yes. And it's pretty fascinating, especially when you consider how many vulnerabilities websites like ours probably have.
Like what?
Oh, email breaches, botnet traffic, things like that.
Yeah, suddenly feeling a bit less secure about my online presence.
Right. And what's even crazier is that Ryan actually creates fake networks to capture passwords.
No way. How does he do that?
Well, he targets public places like airports or Starbucks. Imagine all the data he can access.
It's a little unsettling, but also impressive.
Yeah. And in one case, he used these skills to investigate a child exploitation website after a concerned mother sent him a text.
Wow, so he's actually using his skills to fight against these predators.
Exactly. And the text exchange he uncovered regarding the exploitation of young girls was absolutely chilling.
It's a stark reminder that even seemingly harmless platforms can be used for horrific purposes.
Absolutely. And speaking of disturbing realities,
Yeah.
that SBS Dateline video about child sex tourism in Colombia.
Oh, yeah, the one in Medellin and Cartagena.
Right, those beautiful, vibrant cities.
It's hard to believe such a dark underbelly exists there.
I know. And sex work is actually legal in Colombia.
It is.
Yeah. But that doesn't make it okay for foreigners to seek out illicit encounters with minors.
Right, of course not. That's exploitation.
And the undercover journalist in the video actually met with a driver who moonlights as a pimp, which just shows how this exploitation operates in plain sight.
It's terrifying how normalized it can become in certain environments.
And the video highlights Parquejeras.
Oh, I've heard of that place.
It's supposed to be this lively area,
Right, with restaurants and bars.
but at night it transforms into this open-air brothel.
Wow, it's hard to believe something like that can happen so openly.
And it's heartbreaking to think that underage girls could be caught up in that environment.
It's a stark reminder of the vulnerability of these children.
And the video also shows Ana Maria Gonzalez Ferrero, who's the Secretary of Interior for Cartagena, And she leads these raids on brothels.
Raids, what are they looking for?
Well, they're checking for proper documentation and potential victims.
It's a glimpse into the ongoing fight against child exploitation on the ground.
And it's not easy. The video really delves into the factors that contribute to children's vulnerability.
Like what?
We're talking about poverty, the lack of awareness within the community, and even the potential complicity of families.
It's a complex web of societal issues that create the conditions for exploitation.
And one story that really stood out to me was that of Dario Lavoratori.
Who's that?
He's this 79-year-old Italian national who was arrested for allegedly abusing three 11-year-old girls.
Oh my gosh, that's horrific.
It just shows how global this problem is.
And how these predators often cross borders to exploit children.
Right. Targeting countries with weaker law enforcement or where poverty makes children more desperate.
That's a disturbing reality.
Yeah. And in his case, he denied the allegations, and the community's reaction was mixed.
Really?
Yeah, some defended him, while others called for punishment.
It shows that even when these perpetrators are caught, securing justice for the victims is an uphill battle.
It really is.
Speaking of global efforts, what about the UN? Are they doing anything to address this issue?
Oh yeah, they're definitely involved.
Okay, what are they doing?
Well, the UNODC, which is the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, they have this toolkit.
A toolkit? What's in it?
It's called the Toolkit to Combat Trafficking in Persons.
Okay.
And it's pretty comprehensive, and it goes beyond just basic definitions.
Like what?
It provides practical guidance for governments and organizations on how to actually fight trafficking.
So it's like a global playbook for tackling this issue.
Exactly. They break down these complex issues into manageable steps.
So what kind of things does it cover?
Well, they talk about the importance of international cooperation, the legal nuances of differentiating trafficking from smuggling. It's very thorough.
And what about the victims? Does it address their needs?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the most important things they emphasize is the non-criminalization of trafficking victims.
Oh, that's crucial. Victims shouldn't be treated as criminals.
Exactly. They might have been forced into illegal activities against their will, and treating them like criminals would only discourage others from coming forward.
That makes sense. We need to create a safe space for victims to seek help.
And the toolkit really dives deep into the need for victim assistance.
Like what kind of assistance?
Things like shelter programs, medical and psychological care, legal aid, and reintegration support.
Wow, they're really taking a holistic approach to helping survivors rebuild their lives.
And it's all about empowering victims and recognizing their resilience.
It's about recognizing that they've been through unimaginable trauma and deserve compassion and support.
And that they're not defined by their experience.
Oh, absolutely. They're survivors, not victims.
And what's really interesting is that the toolkit also emphasizes the need to address the root causes of trafficking.
Like poverty and inequality.
Exactly. It's about tackling those systemic issues to prevent future exploitation.
It's a long-term solution, but it's essential.
Absolutely. And they also talk about the importance of public awareness campaigns.
Oh yeah, education is key.
It's about educating communities and empowering individuals to recognize the signs of trafficking and report it.
It's about creating a culture where exploitation is not tolerated.
Exactly, making it harder for traffickers to operate and easier for victims to seek help.
That's a good place to pause for now, I think.
Yeah, we've covered a lot in this first part.
We've gone from the heart-wrenching personal stories
Right.
to the shocking realities of online exploitation and the global hotspots where this is happening.
Yeah, and we've seen the dedication of those fighting back.
It's a complex issue,
It's so complex.
but it's one that we can't ignore.
And in the next part, we'll delve even further into the solutions, strategies, and technologies being used to combat this issue.
I'm looking forward to it because as dark as some of this information has been,
Yeah,
there is hope and there are people making a difference.
absolutely. And we're going to talk all about that in the next part.
So, as we were going through all these sources for this deep dive, one thing that really stood out to me was how interconnected everything is.
Oh, totally.
It's not just about like these individual predators out there.
Yeah.
It's about like whole systems
Right.
that are allowing, exploitation to thrive.
Yeah, we really see that in the personal stories
Yeah.
and in the way that these online networks operate,
Oh, yeah.
even in the legal loopholes that these traffickers are exploiting. It's like this massive web.
It's huge.
It's so hard to untangle.
And that UNODC toolkit, it really like drives that point home.
Yeah.
They talk about the need for strong international, legal frameworks
No.
like extradition treaties and mutual legal assistance
Yeah.
agreements. Because without that stuff, it's basically impossible to go after these criminals across
Oh, yeah,
borders.
because they don't just stop in borders.
Exactly.
So why should we?
So we can't, like, they're operating across jurisdictions,
Right.
which makes that international cooperation so important.
Yeah, totally. And they go even further. They
Okay.
talk about the importance of each country, doing their own problem assessment
Sure.
and developing their own strategies.
So basically, like, each country needs to understand their own unique context
Yeah,
and then figure out solutions that are going to work in that specific situation.
exactly.
Okay, yeah, that seems like a really big ask.
It is, but the toolkit, it actually provides guidance
Okay.
on how to do those assessments and develop national action plans
Okay.
and how to coordinate efforts between all these different agencies.
So it's like a blueprint, but it's customized
Yeah.
to fit each country.
Exactly.
That's actually really interesting. So it's not just like a one-size-fits-all approach.
Not at all.
Okay.
And what I thought was really cool was how it's comprehensive,
Hmm.
but also adaptable.
Yeah.
It covers everything from victim identification and protection to prevention strategies,
Yeah.
but it always emphasizes this rights-based approach.
Sure. So ensuring that the human rights of, trafficking victims are like at the center of every single effort.
Which is so important.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes we can get really caught up
Oh, yeah.
in the laws and the strategies and kind of lose sight of the fact that these are real people whose lives are being impacted.
Absolutely. We have to remember the human cost of all of this.
Yeah, and that's where victim assistance comes in, right?
Yes.
I mean, the toolkit, it talks about all these different services that should be available to victims,
Like what kind of services?
like shelter, medical care,
Mm-hmm.
psychological support, legal aid,
Yeah.
and reintegration support.
So it's not just about getting them to safety. It's about helping them process what they've been through and rebuild their lives.
It's a long process.
It is. And, one thing that we touched on earlier that the toolkit really emphasizes is this idea of non-criminalization of victims.
Yeah.
Because it's just tragic how often victims are actually treated like criminals.
Yeah, especially if they've been forced into illegal activities.
Right. They might get arrested for, immigration violations or prostitution,
Right.
which just makes everything worse for them.
Yeah, absolutely. The toolkit is very clear that needs to change.
Yeah.
We need to shift our perspective, recognize that these are survivors
Yeah.
who need support and protection, not punishment.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing the trauma they've experienced and providing the right kind of care.
And that support, it has to be trauma-informed, right?
Yeah.
Recognizing that psychological impact
Mm-hmm.
and really tailoring services to meet their unique needs.
And also treating them with dignity and respect.
Yeah.
Recognizing their resilience and their strength in the face of, unimaginable adversity.
It makes me wonder, though, are there examples in these sources, of successful victim assistance programs?
Well, I mean, like Shared Hope International, they're a great example. They're really focused on providing that comprehensive care to survivors
Yeah.
and advocating for policies that are really prioritizing victims' needs.
So it goes beyond just rescuing them.
Totally.
It's about really giving them the tools that they need to heal and rebuild their lives.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
And, there are so many other organizations out there around the world that are doing incredible work
I'm sure.
to support trafficking survivors,
Right.
providing everything from shelter to medical care to legal aid to counseling.
It's really, really good to know that those resources are out there
Yeah.
and that there are people who are dedicated to helping these individuals
Mm-hmm.
pick up the pieces
Yeah.
and reclaim their lives.
So speaking of dedicated individuals,
Yeah.
remember Caleb Altmaier,
Yeah.
the rescuer from that Michael Francesi video?
Yeah.
He talked about how only a small percentage of trafficking cases actually involve kidnapping.
Yeah.
He really emphasized that force, fraud, or coercion, those are the much more common tactics.
It's okay.
It really, it shifted my perspective on how trafficking happens.
I feel like before I was so focused on that image
Yeah.
of someone being snatched off the street.
Yeah, it's much more nuanced than that.
The reality is so much more nuanced.
And it often involves, exploiting people who are already in really desperate situations or
Yeah.
who lack strong support networks,
Right.
which brings us back to that importance of prevention and addressing those root causes of trafficking.
So it's not just about cracking down on the criminals.
Right.
It's about creating a world where fewer people are vulnerable in the first place.
Exactly, like tackling poverty and inequality,
Yeah.
lack of opportunity, discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big challenge.
Yeah, it is.
But we can't ignore it
We can't.
if we really want to end trafficking.
And that SBS Dateline video, I keep thinking about it.
Yeah.
It really highlighted how sex tourism is fueling child exploitation.
Oh, yeah, especially in places like Colombia.
Yeah, it was eye-opening.
It was.
It just shows how, like, the lure of cheap sex and the anonymity of being in a foreign country,
Mm-hmm.
it can really lead some people to engage in behavior that they wouldn't even consider back home.
It's like they think they can get away with anything.
Yeah, and remember that driver who was moonlighting as a pimp?
Yeah.
It just shows how this exploitation is so embedded.
It's a global industry
Yeah.
with these complex networks.
It's wild.
And it's happening right in front of us.
Yeah, so we really have to be vigilant, like no matter where we are.
You never know what's going on beneath the surface.
It's so easy to think, like, oh, that wouldn't happen here.
Right.
But the truth is, it can happen anywhere.
Absolutely.
And I think that's why awareness is so important.
Yeah.
Educating ourselves, our families,
Our communities.
our communities, yeah.
About the signs
Mm-hmm.
and how to report it.
Because it's not just a law enforcement issue.
It's a societal issue.
Yeah.
We all have a role to play.
Absolutely. And speaking of awareness,
Yeah.
let's go back to technology. I mean, we've talked about how the internet can be a tool for traffickers,
Right.
but it can also be used to fight against them.
Oh, absolutely. Like, remember Ryan Montgomery, the ethical hacker?
Yes.
He's a great example of how technology can disrupt these networks.
Yeah, and protect potential victims.
And Shared Hope International, they're using Salesforce to enhance their outreach and their impact.
Right.
They're really leveraging data and analytics to better understand the problem.
It's like a digital arms race, but for good.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it.
And let's not forget about the dark web.
Yeah.
Remember that video about Nathan Larson?
Yeah, that was terrifying.
It really shows how the dark web can be a breeding ground for child exploitation.
Yeah, it's so disturbing.
It's a constant game of cat and mouse with law enforcement.
It really is.
And we have to invest in the resources and technologies to stay ahead of the game.
And it's not just about law enforcement. It's
Yeah.
also about education
Yes.
and prevention.
Talking to our kids about online safety.
Yes, giving them the tools
To protect themselves.
to protect themselves.
But to be a part of the solution.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that it's a multi-pronged approach
It has to be.
to combating trafficking.
It's law enforcement, prevention, victim assistance, education, awareness.
All of it.
It's a complex problem that demands a comprehensive response.
And from all of these sources, it's clear that there's no silver bullet.
There isn't, but what's encouraging is that there are so many people out there who
Yeah.
are dedicated to making a difference,
Mm-hmm.
from rescuers to law enforcement officials to advocates to educators.
Yeah.
There's a whole movement pushing back against this.
It's amazing.
So, as we continue this deep dive in the next part, we're going to explore some of the more promising strategies and innovations
Okay.
that are giving us some real reason to hope for a brighter future.
I'm really looking forward to that. Because I know we've talked about a lot of bleak information.
Yeah.
The progress is being made.
Yeah.
And there are people out there who are dedicated to making a difference.
Absolutely. And that's what we need to focus on.
As we kind of wrap up this whole deep dive into child trafficking, it's hard not to feel just overwhelmed by everything we've learned.
Yeah, it's been a lot, for sure.
It's heavy stuff. And I think one of the things that's really stayed with me is that story from Unfiltered Stories about the woman who was adopted by a predator.
Oh, yeah. That one was really tough to hear.
Because it just highlights how traffickers will often exploit these positions of trust.
Right. It's not always a stranger.
It makes it so much harder
It really does.
to even detect
Yeah.
and prevent this kind of abuse.
And it really underscores the need for, vigilance and education on every level, from families and communities to schools and law enforcement. We need to be having these conversations.
Absolutely. And speaking of law enforcement, I thought it was fascinating to hear about the work of Ana Maria Gonzalez Ferrero in Colombia,
Oh, yeah. She's amazing.
leading those raids on brothels, trying to root out exploitation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real glimpse into what it takes to combat this crime.
It's not easy work.
Not at all.
And it shows that it's not just about, rescuing victims. It's about dismantling that entire infrastructure
Yeah.
that supports trafficking.
And it really does require that multi-pronged approach
Oh, absolutely.
that we've been talking about.
Strengthening laws, improving international cooperation,
Yeah.
supporting victim assistance programs,
Mhm.
and addressing those root causes. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, and that's where organizations like Shared Hope International, I think, are doing such important work.
They are.
Their focus on prevention,
Yeah.
education,
Advocacy.
advocacy. It's so important
It is.
for creating a world where fewer children are at risk.
And their use of technology is really smart, using Salesforce to maximize their impact. That's impressive.
Yeah, really innovative.
It shows how powerful, technology can be in this fight.
Absolutely. And I keep thinking about Ryan Montgomery.
Oh, yeah, the ethical hacker.
Yeah, his work is it's so fascinating
It is.
and a little unsettling.
A little bit.
Exposing those vulnerabilities on websites and even capturing passwords in public places.
Yeah, you don't realize how vulnerable you are until someone like him shows you.
I know. It's a good reminder to be really careful about our own online security
Absolutely.
and to teach our kids about the potential dangers, too.
It's so important, especially for young people who are spending so much time online.
And then there's the dark web.
Ugh, yeah, the dark web.
That video about Nathan Larson,
That was chilling.
I'm still thinking about it.
It's a reminder that there's a lot of darkness out there.
And that we need to be constantly vigilant.
For sure. It's an ongoing battle.
It really is. And I think, we've seen from all these sources that combating child trafficking, it's a massive undertaking.
It is. It's a huge challenge.
There's no easy solution.
No quick fix.
But what gives me hope
Me too.
is that there are so many people out there who are dedicated to fighting this.
It's inspiring to see.
Rescuers like Caleb Altmaier,
Yeah.
law enforcement officials.
Advocates, educators.
This whole movement of people who are saying no more.
And that's powerful.
Yeah, and it's not just professionals. It's about each of us
Yeah.
taking responsibility, staying informed, and speaking up.
Exactly. We can all make a difference.
So as we kind of wrap up this whole deep dive,
Yeah.
what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think the biggest one is that child trafficking is a global problem.
Yeah.
It's not just happening over there.
It's everywhere.
It's in our own communities, online, even within families.
And we need to be having those tough conversations
Absolutely.
with our kids about online safety.
Teaching them how to protect themselves.
Yeah.
And to recognize the warning signs.
And to report anything that seems suspicious.
Right. Because sometimes those small actions can make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need to support the organizations that are doing this work on the front lines.
Like Shared Hope International.
Yes. Donating, volunteering, spreading the word.
It all helps.
It all makes a difference. This deep dive has been, it's been eye-opening.
It has.
And at times heartbreaking, but it's also been inspiring.
Yeah, I agree.
To see all the incredible work that's being done out there.
To know that there are people who are dedicated to making a difference.
And I hope our listeners are walking away with a deeper understanding of just how complex this issue is.
Me too.
And the devastating impact it has.
Yeah.
And the different ways that we can all help.
We can all be a part of the solution.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and let's work together to create a world where all children are safe from exploitation.
That's the goal.